Just to set the scene, because we have such a fantastic international panel, I want to ask each of our panelists just to briefly outline their position, introduce their universities, the national context, talk about how important internationalization is to their institutions, and perhaps the best place to start with one of the most international universities in the world, I think NYU, is with Andrew Hamilton. Could you make some opening remarks, please, Andrew?
Phil, happy to, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to follow Louise Richardson and to be able to put in context the international efforts of a university like University of Oxford, and 18 months ago I moved to become the president of NYU. And I think for me, the biggest conclusion of that transition was one that all of us, I think, believe, that there's no one right way, there's no one correct way in which to commit an institution to a particular international or global approach to education. Oxford's very much taken the view that reproducing itself in other countries loses much of that critical essence that is Oxford. The Bodleian Library, the colleges, the relentless drizzle, all are essential for the atmosphere and the educational elements of the university. NYU is very much located, has a different historical, cultural forces at play on it. It's in one of the world's most international cities, New York City, and over its history, NYU has taken a very bold and a very intriguing, I think, approach to the internationalization. It's been long-standing. It was nearly 60 years ago that NYU opened up its first site overseas. It was NYU Madrid in the 1950s, a time when, let's remember, Madrid was under Franco dictatorship, and it began the first site where NYU students would then spend time abroad, be educated in a different culture, in a different environment. That was followed soon after by NYU Paris. So already 60 years ago, NYU had 2 sites abroad. In the 1990s, there was an important step, which was a wonderful villa in Florence was left to NYU. That then became NYU Florence. And again, what has this led to? It's led over the past 6 decades to the creation of now, outside New York City, 13 sites for NYU internationally. 2 of them, in the last decade or so, have become full-blown campuses. One in Abu Dhabi and one in Shanghai. Both of those campuses have around 1,000 students. Both of them have standing faculty. Both of them have a very clear, a very distinctive physical presence. In Abu Dhabi, it's a 40-acre campus and a integrated set of dorms and research labs and lecture theaters. In Shanghai, NYU Shanghai, it's a single building, a 15-story building to reflect the location of the site within one of the world's most dynamic, but also one of the world's most crowded cities of Shanghai. And I think, what has that led to? It's led to a very real sense within NYU that this is absolutely right. It's absolutely in tune with the times, despite the rhetoric that we're hearing from politicians about withdrawal and isolation and Brexit and building walls on borders. That reminds us, and the discussion in the question time about populism reminds us all that, of course, one of the great powers that universities have in their armament is their history. The fact that in a country like the United States, NYU is 186 years old. It's seen many populist politicians in that time. Indeed, the very political structure of the US almost encourages a more populist, a more brazen approach to elections. The primary system does not does not encourage the demure or the shy to step into the roles. It's those with strong, populist, appealing personalities. And so we, at universities like NYU, at universities like Oxford with a much longer history, can actually point to those historical roles that the university has played through crisis, through wars, through civil wars, in the case of both Oxford and NYU. And these are things that then remind us and allow us to bring a sense of proportion to what are obviously challenging times, but also a sense of history, that the role of the university, as Louise so eloquently said, is to remind society of the fundamental principles that have allowed these institutions to thrive, to contribute, to advance knowledge in so many effective ways. And certainly for me, and certainly for NYU in 2017, one of those commitments is to globalization. One of those commitments is to ensure, in spite of the rhetoric, that our students are prepared for a 21st century economy, a 21st century political environment that will be very, very clearly global in its dimension, and thus how critical it is for our students to be prepared for that. And certainly at NYU, one of the ways we believe we can prepare them is by exposing them to their education, no matter what their major is, no matter whether it's science, whether it's political science, whether it's social science, whether it's the humanities, but to be exposed to that in the environment of a different culture, a different language. And certainly for NYU, that's now led the university. It's become the university in the US with the largest number of international students coming to New York to study, and it's the university in the US that sends the largest number of students abroad to study in, as I said, those 13 different sites. So a brief introduction to NYU, but certainly in the question time, I'm sure there'll be aspects of that strategy that I can unfold a little more in a little more detail.
Well, thank you very much. That's very helpful and very coherent, and absolutely we'll return to some of those important issues. Sabine, could I ask you to introduce your institution and its philosophy?
Yes, thank you. So I'm really delighted being here, and so a very good morning to everyone. Humboldt University, or Humboldt Universität zu Berlin, is one of the leading universities in Germany and Europe. It was founded in 1810 in the heart of Berlin, 70 years after founding the Charité, which is now a joint faculty of Humboldt Universität and Freie Universität. And it was founded by Wilhelm von Humboldt. Thinking to that, cosmopolitanism is an essential characteristic of a university named after both Humboldt brothers. It has some 35,000 students in 8 faculties with a distinguished international reputation, especially in the humanities, life science, natural science, and law and theology. The international agenda is based on the proposition that the dynamics of an academic communication and collaboration is, of course, not restricted by geographical and also geographical borders, and those set by political populism, as we just have heard. Humboldt University assists its researchers and teaches its students and its support and administration staff to operate successfully in various cultural contexts of science, and therefore it set up conceptual model and programs, especially focusing on partnerships, which are strategic ones, and on the other hand, to enlarge student mobility by different programs. 20% of our students are international ones, and during especially the last years, we established some courses which we saw we would need it, trickling the hint and for a German university that you need some German to survive and a little bit more. So it's nice to have that. So the international study modules named as Berlin Perspective are interdisciplinary modules in English and German for international students for all subjects who want to study at Humboldt University. And this special programming is offered in context of internationalization focus at university and aims to support especially the international incoming students at the beginning of their studies, because we have a lot of difference between the systems in the US or Great Britain or abroad, so that you need some detailed knowledge how to handle the system. Foreign students, you want to help them making the transition from studying in their home countries to study in Germany a little bit easier. Often they face linguistic and oriental difficulties. Not only do they lack sufficient German skills, but also the necessary knowledge of German academic culture. On the other hand, during the last years, one of our main challenges were the incoming refugees to Germany. During the last years, 1 million refugees entered Germany, and all of us, and also and especially we in Berlin, are forced to establish special programs for that. Humboldt University was undertaken several measures as a special refugee programming to cope with the refugee situation that reached Germany during the last months and years. We have opened many courses to refugees, and we experienced, on the other hand, a fantastic engagement of our staff, our students. For instance, students in several faculties, for example, the Faculty of Law, have established a special refugee law clinic offering free counsel for refugees in all fields of legal issue, for example, immigration and so on. The Refugee Law Clinic has just been awarded a prize by the German Ministry of Education for their efforts. To give some examples. Regarding to the current situation in the US, we are facing and experiencing a rising willingness by especially researchers to return to Germany, if they are Germans, or on the other hand, and that is also astonishing, to leave the States if they did not have contact with the German systems beforehand. So, to give some ideas about Humboldt University.
Thank you very much, and can we just move straight on to Peter, if you don't mind?
Thank you very much, Phil, and thank you for the invitation to join such an illustrious panel. I'm not ethnically qualified to represent Asia here, but I will at least talk a little bit about Hong Kong and a bit about China. The University of Hong Kong is an English-speaking university. It's always been such, so we are the only English-speaking comprehensive university in Greater China. The only subject which is taught in Chinese is Chinese. Everything else is taught in English. About 65% of our professoriate are from outside Hong Kong. About half of those are from mainland China and about half from elsewhere in the world. One of the reasons that we score very highly in indices of internationalization, including the Times Higher's own one, is because of our links with China, and for various reasons which suit us very nicely because it makes us look good. Links with China are regarded as international for us. So we take a lot of students, both undergraduate and postgraduate, from mainland China. We have a lot of staff from mainland China. We have a lot of research collaborations. We have a lot of funding collaborations with mainland China. We have not taken the campus route. Andy mentioned this. I get offered a campus in China about once a month. Chinese governments have land, and they have money, and they have ambition. And one of the ways that they want to deploy those resources is the creation of international campuses. We've not taken that route. We do have a hospital in Shenzhen. So Shenzhen is a remarkable city just across the border from Hong Kong, currently about 45 minutes by road. When we have the fast train, which we'll have next year, it'll be 20 minutes. So it's very close. It's a city that's gone from 300,000 to 17.5 million in 30 years. And part of that's been the development of infrastructure, including hospitals. So we have a hospital there. We have a research institute in Shenzhen as well. Then we have a research institute in Hangzhou. We have a study center in Shanghai, and we have an office in Beijing. So we have footprints in mainland China, but we've not gone down the campus route. And the main reason, certainly in my time there, and I think my predecessor felt more or less the same, was that we don't need to. We have rapid access to China. We don't need to duplicate what we're doing in Hong Kong by doing it in China, because we can travel relatively easily backwards and forwards to these locations, and we have many of the advantages of our geopolitical position. I'm fond of saying that Asia is where all the action is in higher education. I firmly believe that. Unfortunately, it's where all the action is in terms of political instability at the moment, and North Korea seems to have even taken over the South China Sea as being a potential flashpoint, and that's obviously a worry for us. And I'll come back to the point about politics at the end of my remarks. So, the University of Hong Kong, with its international traditions, aims to be even more international. We've set ourselves a very ambitious target of 100% of our undergraduates having 2 periods of time outside Hong Kong during their study, which is normally 4 years in Hong Kong. It's 4, 5, or 6 years. And that's 1 period of time in the mainland of China and 1 period of time somewhere else in the world. At the moment, it's about 50% of our students have an international experience outside Hong Kong, and about 20% of them spend time in mainland China. So we aim to get both of those figures up to 100% by 2022. We've given ourselves 5 years to do it. And we do that because we firmly believe in the educational and pedagogical advantage of such experiences. Getting people outside their comfort zone, all the kind of remarks that have been made by others about giving people new experiences in new parts of the world, new language, new societal structure. For us, the overarching complication, apart from the obvious ones of funding and logistics and quality control and whatnot, is the influence of politics. We have ample opportunities for our students to study in China, but we've not made it a graduation requirement. We aim to provide opportunities to 100% of students, but if there are students that really don't want to go or can't go for reasons of personal responsibilities or anything else, we won't make it a graduation requirement. And some of that is just political expediency. Forcing students in Hong Kong to go to mainland China carries a political overtone that when we first announced the scheme caused a lot of noise. But we firmly believe in it. And I think Phil may have heard me recite an anecdote before, but I always think of one particular student. We have an engineering project in a province called Guangxi. Guangxi is a rural part of Western China, which has a lot of ethnic minority populations, particularly living in the mountains. And our Faculty of Engineering has got a project which has been going on for 12 years now in Guangxi, building schools and dormitories and community centres for some of the villages. And I travelled up there for their 10th anniversary 2.5 years ago. And it's a long journey where you wind up through the hills in a car, so you have a lot of time to talk to whoever you're travelling with. And I travelled with one of my engineering students, and he was saying that the first time he went to Guangxi, he was scared. He didn't want to go. He was worried he would get ill. He was worried he might be indoctrinated. He was worried he might just disappear and never go back to Hong Kong. And he had all sorts of what he now recognises were irrational fears about going to Guangxi. And he went because of peer pressure, largely because he was expected to go by his classmates and by his teachers. And he talked about how this had transformed his own personal outlook on the world, including China. He'd met with people that they looked like him, they were Chinese like him. They lived in a totally different setting with totally different socioeconomic structures to everything that he'd been used to. He found that he had skills that could help them, and he was greatly enriched by that. But actually, more importantly, he found that they also helped him. and that he felt that he opened his eyes to a whole aspect of the world that he never previously would have experienced. And he now has become an advocate for this project, and he now tells other students who have the same sort of doubts that he had about what the values are and why they should go. And when I travelled up there with him, he was going on his 4th trip to Guangxi. So if you just take that one anecdote as an example, I think most Hong Kong students can benefit in similar ways from exposure in parts of Asia, including mainland China. I had dinner with an academic from Beijing a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying, can you explain to me why every university student in the world wants to go to China, apart from the ones in Hong Kong? And of course, it's not quite true that no students in Hong Kong want to go to China, but there is a political dimension in Hong Kong. And one of my regrets about my time in Hong Kong is that I've not been able to oppose the politicization of higher education more effectively. It's something which it affects me every day of my working life. And I think this is, to me, this is an example of political manipulation of something which really should be devoid from politics. But it is impossible to separate higher education in my part of the world from politics. And that brings me to, I just wanted to say a couple of words about China. The extraordinary, Louise quoted some figures about the percentage of GDP which goes into China. So 4.1% of a very large GDP is a huge amount of money. And you only need to walk around any university campus in mainland China to see the results of that. Buildings, international collaborations, institutes, extraordinary amount of investment in infrastructure and in people. And I find that enormously exciting, and I find universities in China very exciting places. But there is also the ideological dimension, which you've no doubt read about, where people, especially in the central government, are rather nervous about the universities. They don't want the universities to be the centre of revolution. And so there's a bit of a debate going on amongst some of the principal universities in China about how important outside influence is. Do we need Western influence? Do we need all these visiting experts, students, academics, or can we manage our higher education's development on its own? And this is a very interesting tension. And I think you are seeing increasing internationalization of Chinese universities, but it's controlled, it's regulated. And the rise of the Chinese universities in the various rankings is most impressive. A lot of it is about investment. Singapore is another example. I've spent a lot of my time in Hong Kong trying to get the Hong Kong government to value its universities in the same way that Singapore values its universities. And some of this is about money, some of it's also about shouting from the rooftops. Hong Kong actually has more universities in the top 100 in the world in the enemy's rankings than any other city on the planet per head of population. The only other city which comes close is London, but the population of London is higher. So actually Hong Kong has an intensely international flavour. It has many top universities, but the government in Hong Kong is actually rather worried about its universities instead of being proud of them. So I think there's something to be said for universities shouting their merits from the rooftops, persuading politicians. It's not just about money, although obviously we'd like them to give us more money, but it's also about being proud of them and being about what they can contribute to the aims of the city, state, or nation, whichever it is you're talking about. You can't separate the international flavour of the University of Hong Kong from the city in which it sits, and Andy made this point about New York. Hong Kong is an effortlessly international place, partly because of its location, partly because of its history, and partly because of its composition. So most multinational businesses have headquarters in Hong Kong. It's fantastic for us for internships and for placements and whatnot for our students because we have direct linkage to all these multinational companies. But the challenge, I guess, is for Hong Kong to maintain that position when other parts of the world, particularly for us, mainland China, but also other parts of Asia, are opening up and becoming every bit as global as Hong Kong has ever been. So I think we harness our strengths, we recognise the pace of development of our neighbours, and we try to avoid excessive politicisation of the higher education sector, sometimes successfully and sometimes not.
Thank you very much, Peter. Lots of interesting points there to reflect on, so please have your questions ready. Thanks for mentioning Shenzhen. Our next summit is actually going to be in Shenzhen, so we're very excited about that in February. But Santa, could I ask you to introduce yourself, your institution, before we open things up?
Sure, yeah. I'm currently at the University of British Columbia. I've been there about a year. You know, I think that UBC represents many of the universities within Canada in being very international. And you've highlighted UBC, but many of the Canadian universities in your ranking. And I think it's something which is special about Canadian universities. And I think that in Canada, we believe that this is a very attractive time for students from all over the world to consider Canada as a destination. UBC is an institution with about 64,000 students and about $600 million a year in direct costs and research funding, about $720 million a year indirect costs included. About 1 in 4 of our students are international. And our strategy, like Hong Kong, is not one of creating campuses around the world, but rather to enter into very strategic, high-level relationships with partners, many of whom are in the audience, which we really enjoy. We have about 300 partnerships, but we really focus on about 10. And those 10 are in the top 15 in THE. Some very notable ones include Sciences Po, Yale University, Tsinghua University, and Imperial College London, as just a number of examples. We intend in the next 10 years to continue to focus on those strategic partnerships, to strengthen them and to invest resources in enhancing the quality of those partnerships. So actually to decrease the number of partnerships and really focus on high quality ones with certain specific partners. But I really like to get to the question, the title of this session, Modern Graduate Citizens of the World or Citizens of Nowhere. I think probably the most interesting aspect of our current strategy has to do with that question. What is the role of the modern research university in creating global citizens? And so in this year, we've thought a lot about what UBC wishes to accomplish and contribute to the ecosystem of global higher education. And we've made some decisions about what we're investing in the near term and in the far term to try to become significant contributors in creating global citizens, not only in UBC, but also thinking about how we prepare them once they graduate and spread around the world to having a positive impact on the real challenges that the world faces, ranging from conflict resolution, sustainability, all the grand challenges that exist, chronic disease, and disparities across every part of human society. So what we've done in this first year is to really focus on that. And we've launched a new policy school, which is built upon a foundation of 2 more established institutes within the university, something called the Liu Institute for Global Affairs. We've launched a new Masters of Public Policy, and the 3rd cohort is coming into the institution, and with the policy school just being launched this year. And another pillar of this effort has to do with really building upon an interdisciplinary PhD program. And many of the theses of graduates, PhD graduates of this effort, really focused on the global challenges of the world, thinking about global conflict, thinking about issues of public health. And so there's going to be a significant refocusing of what UBC does to harness the collective expertise of our faculty across multiple schools and faculties to focus on global challenges. We think that that's a responsibility of the modern research university. So that's really our tact. We are in the midst of recruiting through a set of President's Excellence Chairs, a new President's Endowed Chair in Global Affairs, Global Development. You will see much more of a focus on that at UBC. We believe, just representing all the universities in Canada, not just UBC, that this is a very good time to consider Canada as a destination, whether you're a faculty member or a student, and the data which you've reported on in Times Higher indicate that. Canada has become a top destination for EU graduates as a destination. And two recent competitions, our own President's Excellence Chair endowed chairs, will be 6 per year into the foreseeable future. We're recruiting the best and brightest from around the world. Many of them are coming from the United States and from Britain. And the Canada 150 Chair Program, which we're just in the midst of in Canada, adjudicating about 1,000 expressions of interest, many of them from the United States and Britain, is an effort supported by the federal government to really capitalize on this moment where we think this is Canada's moment. And it's a very attractive place of stability and robust funding of higher education. And that's what's happening at UBC in Canada.
And thank you very much. I'm very impressed that we got through the whole panel without mentioning the T word, the Trump word. But it is very significant, actually, that when Trump was inaugurated, when the travel ban was put in place with the executive order, the traffic to Times Higher Education's Canadian jobs jumped, and the traffic to our paid best universities in Canada jumped significantly. So I think there is clear anecdotal evidence now of potential changing flows of talent. Could I maybe go back to you, Andrew, and ask about that? I mean, your institution is focused very much on branch campuses, which is probably the best way of getting around any challenges around immigration and visas and mobility. But, I mean, do you see, I think anecdotally it seems to be the case already, do you see that America may be becoming a less attractive destination for international students? And how does an institution like NYU...
Yeah. I thought I was being so clever. I left the UK, I left Oxford about 6 months before Brexit, and I thought, my sense of timing was exquisite. And of course, I landed in the US right in time for Mr. Trump to be elected. It is always rather wonderful, as everyone in the room is guilty of this, including me. We embrace proudly our graduates who have gone on to great things and leadership roles. It is rather wonderful how silent the University of Pennsylvania has been over Mr. Trump's election. But Phil, obviously that's something, of course we're concerned. The rhetoric, the executive orders on travel bans. Of course, it is the case that they haven't been implemented. Thank goodness the courts have played the role that they're supposed to play in the United States, which is to question decisions of the executive, and indeed they've been held up by the courts. Right now, I can speak for NYU, we have seen no impact on our international applications. Your comment about will America become a less attractive place, it certainly won't help the rhetoric coming from Washington, but actually it has not at this point been as serious as we had feared. Our international applications last year were up. Our number of international students studying at NYU this year, just the new cohort arriving, has never been higher. It's now more than 25% of our students. And again, of course, America is a very large country. New York City has its own vibe. It has its own sense of itself that it projects to the world. And despite the fact that President Trump is a native-born son of New York, it's a city that does not express a particular strong affection for him and has done so both at its political level and its cultural level for some time. So certainly at the moment, what does that do? It puts upon us the onus to make sure that we project an open, a welcoming, a supportive environment for international students coming to the US, trying to avoid the kind of reaction of international students that Peter described in the student of his that he traveled with. And certainly so far, we are not seeing any impact on our applicants. Of course, inevitably there are local issues. inevitably there are other aspects about the environment on any campus that may play into that. One of the rather troubling reports that came out recently was the University of Missouri has seen, after a number of troubles on its campus in the past couple of years, has seen a significant drop in its student numbers. But certainly so far the impact of Trump has been not so strong.
And we talk about collegiality here, but I mean, could I be frank with you, Sabine? And we talk about Canada's moment. I think that is around the visible internationalization. Trudeau has been very clear in his rhetoric, in stark contrast to Trump. But Sabine, in Germany, do you see this, you know, the UK's Brexit talk? I mean, there are real signs of potential hope there in terms of keeping the UK in Horizon 2020. Some news expected on Wednesday. The rights of citizens to stay here. But do you see Germany has an opportunity here to internationalize more aggressively and have more international students?
Yes, we are expecting a chance to get more internationalized. And we are expecting also a change regarding international students, especially from UK, but nobody knows how it is going to develop. So it's really a big question mark at the moment. But looking at our statistics, 20% of our students are those going to UK as international students, so we expect a severe decline on that fact. And on the other hand, I'd say a little bit less, but around 20% of our international students are also coming from Great Britain. So we expect changes, but nobody knows in which direction precisely. On the other hand, Berlin is facing a great chance at the moment, and a lot of young people, they define and they experienced visiting Berlin as a tourist, as a place to be. Therefore, the universities of Berlin, not only Humboldt University, but also the others, try to get a more leading role within German ranking, to enforce the attractiveness for foreign students and scientists. So under especially also the current government, we get a lot of help and advice. So we try to develop our international profile to establish more institutional help for incoming students from all over the world.
One of the things, it's interesting, from a UK perspective, we've tended to see international students as a financial necessity first, and as an inherent good second. I guess in Germany there's a coherent and concerted effort to increase international student recruitment. That's not necessarily driven by finances, is it? That is something that's a decision that it's inherently good for domestic students, good for society, good for the students to have an international mix on campus. Is that fair?
Yes, we want to have an international mix at campus. We appreciate the international knowledge, characteristics, and the intercultural skills of incoming students and scientists, of course. So we like to foster that and integrate it into a university strategy. As you perhaps know, there is no tuition fee also for international students coming in. Especially in Berlin, everything is for free. So it's really not a necessity in economics affairs.
Yeah. And Santa, could I go back to you? You talked about grand challenges. I mean, do you feel that the internationalization of education is increasingly important now as we enter this sort of post-truth environment, alternative facts. I mean, is that something inherent to the educational experience of your students, that they need to be global citizens in the sense of being exposed to different views, different backgrounds, different cultures? Is that a fundamental part of the education experience for modern undergraduates?
I think that's part of it, but if you don't mind, I'd like to make sort of a slightly different point.
Sure.
Which really underscores this whole summit's title or theme of collaborating for a better world. And I guess it's King's vision. You know, we fundamentally believe at UBC that global relationships focus on grand challenges is necessary to actually solve those issues. We don't believe that any university, no matter how large it might be in terms of research funding, is equipped alone to solve any of these challenges. And so to give you an example, and we think increasingly the moonshot projects or the solutions to these grand challenges are going to require strategic partnerships. I'll give you 2 examples. One has to do with a trilateral relationship we just announced with the University of Tokyo and the Max Planck Society. Each of us has a large stable of quantum physicists, but we have come together to create the largest group of quantum physicists in the world. And we truly believe that this kind of collaboration will really underpin quantum communications and quantum computing, which is the next frontier of communication, if you will. The other has to do with, and it's not only institutions, global institutions that need a partner, but we need to increasingly, as has been said several times, include governments and industry. So the last example that I'll talk about, and this all helps with the education of our global students, has to do with the partnership that we have developed in the Cascadia corridor with the University of Washington, other Washington and Oregon institutions very likely in the future, and Microsoft. It was actually Microsoft that approached UW and UBC, 2 of the largest research universities in that region, to build bridges, saying, and it was actually Bill Gates who said, the reason why Microsoft has been strong and it has endured is because of the strength of UW. But now they need more than that. The talent production from UW alone and the research coming out of UW alone isn't enough. And in that region, they need UBC to be part of it. So all of this underscores the thesis that collaborating is really essential for bettering the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, could I go back to you? I mean, you know, I talk about Trump and potential shifting geopolitics. There's a bizarre situation in some respects that China almost now looks like a great bastion of openness and internationalization. You know, the Belt and Road Project, even at the World Economic Forum last year, there was a great grand gesture of globalization at the same time as Trump and May were shrinking in on themselves. Is that a reality that Chinese soft power will become a major issue? And how do universities respond? I mean, there's lots of wonderfully exciting opportunities, but as you say, there becomes inherent challenges around politicization and free speech, free inquiry, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are terrific opportunities. I think certainly for Hong Kong, and I think for the rest of the world as well. But it's complicated. A lot of relations with Chinese universities depend on personal relationships. A good relationship between the presidents, and then sometimes the president of a Chinese university just disappears and moves to another job suddenly, and so you have to start again with building these relationships. The same is true at governmental level. So in China, there's a sort of misperception that all the power lies with the central government. It doesn't really. The power really lies, especially the economic power, lies with the regional governments and the city governments. And so each of those will have various individuals who are very influential. And so you've got to build a relationship with these individuals. That's a very powerful phenomenon. I do think that the opportunities outweigh the risks, I must say. I mean, I think any world-class university that doesn't seek a relationship with mainland China, I think, is missing a trick. But actually how to go about it, I think, is quite variable according to different universities and different areas of focus. For Hong Kong, we have great advantages in our relationship with mainland China, but also we have the political dimension, which makes things slightly more difficult. But we have geographical proximity, we have shared language. I mean, most of my students speak 3 languages. They speak English, Cantonese, and Putonghua, so they're naturally able to go and function in the mainland without any additional language tuition. I think increasingly mainland Chinese universities are starting to teach programs in English. I think that's an interesting development. When you walk around the main universities in China, you don't see that many Western academics, senior academics. You see a few, a sprinkling, and I think that number's growing. You see quite a lot of Western students, but you don't see many Western faculty at the moment. And I think one of the things that will happen in the next few years is you'll see more Western faculty, with or without Mandarin language skills, being able to function in mainland China, and I think that will increase the internationalization. So, yeah, opportunities outweighing risks, I would say.
Let me just jump in. The relationship that NYU has that led to NYU Shanghai is indeed with the Shanghai city government. That's the key relationship, and that's where significant support comes.
And do we sense that there's and this is open to all of you really, but is it inevitable? It seems like there's waves of concern and political pushback, but for Chinese universities to truly reach the upper echelons of the world rankings, there seems to be an acceptance that does require creative thinking, that does require a more westernized approach to education, more liberal arts, more openness. I mean, do you feel there's an inevitable draw towards Chinese academia at least becoming much more westernized in terms of free inquiry and that side of it?
I think in principle, yes. I mean, I think for science and technology and medicine, it's relatively easy. I think for the social sciences and the humanities, it's much more complicated. And so that's the real challenge, I think, is if you can see comprehensive university emancipation in mainland China, not just confined to the science and technology, which is where it's going at the moment. The last few months in China have been characterized by a sort of sense of build-up to October, because in October there'll be the next 5-year plan and Xi Jinping's next 5-year mandate. And there's a lot of the rhetoric, I think, can be explained by that period of consolidation of power. I think the really interesting period will be the next year or two after that, to see whether that rhetoric subsides.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I've hogged the conversation so much I haven't left an awful lot of time for questions, but please do raise a hand. We have our esteemed Nobel laureate guest who would like to ask a question.
Not so esteemed. Peter Auger from Johns Hopkins. I'd like to ask our 4 presidents if they think our universities are really doing their best at making ourselves, relevant to the whole of society. Whether we like it or not, many people in our societies are not impressed with education. Half of Americans have not read a single book last year. 20% believe dinosaurs and cavemen coexisted because they saw it on the Flintstones. Ronald Reagan used to pitch to this audience very effectively. He was very popular. He was well known to be a lackluster student at Eureka College and often posed the question, wonder what would have happened if he'd studied hard at Eureka College. Are we really doing our best to have what we bear relevant to all of society, citizens of all?
Who would like to tackle that? Andrew?
Let me start, and others can jump in. You know, are we doing our best? We certainly are all working hard. Can we do better? Yes, we can. Outreach, we've already discussed it this morning. Engagement with our communities, whether it be through interaction with schools, whether it be connection to government and establishing new programs that reach further into educational systems, even at primary school, to encourage aspiration in young children. Certainly explaining what we do more effectively, explaining why scholarship at its most intense and cutting-edge level is essential for the health and the vitality of society. These are all things we know well, particularly in science and technology. The gulf that there can sometimes be between the technical aspect, the complexity of new advances, and explaining to the world, explaining to society what they mean, their implications and their value. These are things that we are all working hard on, but we can certainly do better.
Santa, you wanted to come in?
I agree with my colleague, say that of course we can do better, and we are hard working to figure out how we should do it, because it's not really easy to find new ways how we could really deliver the information and the processing of getting new knowledge within science to the public. And we are thinking about new formats together with the arts and theater, our neighbors working in the field of exhibition at the Deutsche Historische Museum, or combining that with our direct neighbor, the Gorky Theater, a very international one, in which really young tourists can work together with our young science. And after a round of discussion, stepping in to perform what they think, so that they will be an active partner and member of a productive process.
Sure. And Santa, you wanted to come in as well?
Peter, I would say that many institutions here have open days, and those are very, very important. I think there are some leading institutions that I think have invested in programs in the local area, and that kind of direct involvement in addressing health disparities and educational disparities in the inner city, as Ron has done at Johns Hopkins. I think more of that kind of activity, which is actually something which is more recent development compared to the efforts of many universities in terms of global, will really be essential and be very effective in articulating to the public how important research universities are. So I think a paradigm shift in a little bit more focus on local and regional, in addition to global, will be really an important demonstration of our commitment to the communities in which we live and we should serve.
I mean, I think it's the million-dollar question, and I think if we're honest, the answer is no, we're not very good at it. I think we're very good at preaching to the converted, and you could criticize this kind of gathering as saying, we don't need to convince people in here how important research universities are and globalization and international collaboration and everything, but what about the people that are not in the room? And I don't think we can't just think, oh, that's a small minority and we don't need to worry about them, because it's clear from recent electoral results that it's not a small minority. It's actually a substantial section of the population. So I think we're not very good at it, is the honest answer. I think we need to be better at it. One of the great things about Asia is that people in Asia generally, it's a sweeping stereotype, but people generally believe in education. So many of the people in society, particularly in Hong Kong, who are not educated, will still support education and believe in universities, because there's an inherent belief that education is the fastest route to self-improvement. I think in other parts of the world, unfortunately, that belief is not as strong outside the educational establishments.
Yeah. I should just say I'm very proud that Times Higher Education's Nobel Laureate Survey was covered in The Sun and the New York Post, so we're trying to popularize and Peter's quotes were widely...
Direct connection to Rupert Murdoch. Glad to hear it.
Some questions over here. Can we take two at the same time, please, just for speed? We are a little bit tight on time.
My name is Atsushi Seike from Keio University. I'm ex-president of Keio. I have a question to Andrew. You sort of mentioned about your branch campus in abroad. And my question is, to what extent do you let these branch campuses have autonomy of operation under different circumstances of country? And particularly, I'm curious to know, in what way do you maintain the quality of education and the student as you have in New York? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll just take a second question, the lady behind.
And actually, this will be quick because it's an observation. Good morning. I'm Rajika Bhandari with the Institute of International Education in New York. And at the Institute, we've been measuring student trends to the US since the 1920s. And actually, there's been just one point in time when student flows to the US actually declined, and that was right after 9/11. And what I wanted to add really in response to Mr. Hamilton's observations is that what you said about NYU is exactly what we've been seeing this year, where we've been doing a series of surveys to track the situation as it's unfolded. And just about a month ago, we released the most recent survey, which looked at the measurement of admissions yield in the US for US campuses. And to our great surprise, because the rhetoric was so negative, to our great surprise, we found that actually there was only about a 2% drop in yield in what institutions were seeing for their international admissions. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen this fall, but that 2% could really go either way, as evidenced by
Andrew, while you're tackling that, could we just have a mic down to our colleagues from Shenzhen? And Mike, do you want to tackle that one?
The question about the campuses, and we've had comments from the panel on universities that embrace the campus model and others that don't. And as I said earlier, that's a natural consequence of different universities and their cultures. But Atsushi, to answer your question, we do not use the word branch or satellite. And that's really, in a sense, to reflect the fact that the Abu Dhabi campus and the Shanghai campus in particular are very integrated with the full NYU University. So these are not hybrid degrees, they are not local degrees, they are NYU degrees that are awarded whether in New York, Abu Dhabi or Shanghai. How do we maintain quality? By strengthening that integration. Every academic appointment in Shanghai or Abu Dhabi is approved by a department in New York. Curriculum affairs, curriculum decisions, academic planning are done in coordination. But of course, inevitably, there is a sense of identity, a sense now of growing history within those campuses, and a desire to take greater control of their future. So there will be a natural evolution of strengthening autonomy as those campuses build the faculty cohorts that are the academic leaders there.
Thanks. And I think this is going to have to be the final question.
Yes.
We're overrunning. I'm keeping you from your networking and your collaborating. So.
Okay, my name is Shi Chen. I am from the SUSTech, Southern University of Science and Technology of Shenzhen. And we are going to host next February's THE, the Asia University Summit. So I would like to welcome everyone here to join us next year. And second, I spent over 20 years in the United States. I always believed that the US is the most open country. But now I may change my mind. I think China is one of the most open countries in the world, and especially in higher education. Let's look seriously. Every year, a large portion of Chinese students, including elementary school, even kindergartens, they move to Western society to receive education. They are serious. Also, US universities have now look at the president here. I believe most of the universities, they open the campus or set up a joint program in China. So China benefits greatly from the globalization, especially in higher education. Now I have two questions to you, to panel. First, if you look at the students, the flux mainly is from China, developed countries to Western societies. So what kind of suggestion or secret you can give us, suggestion you can give to us that how we can do to attract the Western society students seriously considering move to China to receive education. This flux must be two ways so that you can continue this kind of thing. Second, we always try to educate our students, cultivate the students to become a citizen of the world. But every one of us is citizen of certain countries. So we are not citizens of nowhere. There's a limitation about that, for example, including IP issues, export control. So what can we do? Really try to work together to make this world better, to work fully engaged. Thank you.
So can we go for rapid fire responses, unfortunately, because of the timing.
Can I give you an anecdote about President Chen? He'll forgive me, I'm sure. His first name is Shi Yi, which means 10-1 or 11. And he says, do people ask me, was I the 11th child of my family? And the answer is no, it's after the 1st of October, which is the national holiday. 10-1, and then he says, how many American children do you know that are called the 4th of July? So he's absolutely right. I mean, Shenzhen's a very open city. It's trying to attract inward traffic as well as outward traffic. China has obviously the advantage of scale, so there are a huge number of students, 7.5 million university graduates per year in mainland China. It's an extraordinary number. So a lot of those will want to come across as postgrads to places like Hong Kong, the US, or the UK, or elsewhere. The challenge, I think, is to attract travel in the other direction. I think some of it's about language. I think some of it's about familiarity. And I think the energy, as you know from your own campus, it's already growing. There's an absolutely relentless momentum into China, but I think it's still patchy. It's still in places like Shanghai and Beijing and Shenzhen because they're the most accessible.
I think we may have to give the last word to Santa.
I agree with what Peter has said in terms of, I think one of the barriers, having been a president of an American university as well as a Canadian, is if you speak to the students that are considering study abroad in China or in Japan, it's really language. And so one of the institutions that I visited that was really doing a very good job in making that less threatening or less foreboding for a Western student really is Chiba University. If you've been at Chiba University, you can see that they have a designated space, and they have people that really try to make it less scary for a Western student to come to Asia. So you might want to take a look at that. I think language is really one of the things that's inhibiting mobility from students in North America to China.
Okay, well, look, I'm really sorry we've had such an amazing conversation that's far too short, but at least we have the networking breaks and lots of opportunities to keep these conversations going. So for now, I'd just like to thank the panel profoundly for their time. Thanks very much.